The morning light spilled through the curtains, painting streaks of gold across the modest bedroom. The air was crisp with the scent of early dawn, and outside, the distant chirping of birds signaled the start of another ordinary day. But today felt anything but ordinary. Rachel sat up in bed, her heart thrumming with excitement. Today wasn't her birthday, but it was close. So close she could practically feel it. Just a few more weeks and she'd finally turned 20. An age she had imagined countless times, picturing it as the gateway to something bigger, something grander. Swinging her legs off the bed, she reached for the calendar hanging on the wall. The days leading up to her birthday were already marked, each date slashed through with eager anticipation. She uncapped a red marker and drew a heavy circle around the final day. The big 20. Rachel bit her lip, a smile creeping onto her face. This birthday wasn't just another year. It was a milestone. It meant she was no longer a teenager. It meant she was stepping into adulthood. And most of all, it meant gifts. Pushing off the bed, she hurried out of the room, her feet padding softly against the wooden floor. The house was small, cozy in a way that spoke of years of quiet struggles, but filled with the warmth of a mother's love. She found her mom in the kitchen, standing by the stove, flipping a pancake with practiced ease. The scent of coffee mingled with the faint aroma of toasted bread. It was a simple breakfast, the same as always. But today, Rachel wasn't thinking about breakfast. She leaned against the counter, her voice bright with excitement. "Mom, my 20th birthday is coming. What are you getting me?" Her mother stilled for a fraction of a second. It was so brief, Rachel almost missed it. Then came the sigh, the hesitant, careful kind, the kind that meant bad news. She turned, placing the spatula on the counter. A tired smile tugged at her lips, but her eyes, those familiar, deep eyes, held something heavier. "Rachel," she started gently. "Things are a bit tight right now, but I'm saving up for it." The words felt like cold water washing over her excitement. Rachel blinked, trying to process them. Saving up. That wasn't an answer. That was an excuse. Her chest tightened. She had expected something, anything, but not this. Not hesitation. Not a reminder of their struggles. She swallowed, her voice a little quieter now. "So, that means you don't even know what you're getting me?" Her mother's smile didn't falter, but it was thin, fragile. "I will, sweetheart. Don't worry. Don't worry." Rachel pressed her lips together, turning away before her frustration showed. But it was already there. She knew money was always an issue. She knew her mother worked herself to the bone just to keep them afloat. But was it really too much to ask for something special? Just this once? It wasn't fair. Other girls her age would be getting expensive gifts, jewelry, shopping sprees, maybe, even trips. She had seen it happen. She had watched her classmates flaunt their birthday presents like trophies, laughing, smiling, knowing they were loved, knowing they were cared for. And yet here she was, being told to wait. Again. A flicker of guilt sparked in her mind, but it was buried beneath something stronger. Disappointment. She didn't want to wait. She didn't want to hear excuses. She wanted something that made her feel seen. Something that made her feel like she mattered, like she was important. Have you ever been upset at a parent over something small? Tell me in the comments. The house was quieter than usual that night. Rachel lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind restless. The conversation from earlier played on repeat in her head. She tried to push it away, but frustration clung to her thoughts like a shadow. She turned onto her side, exhaling sharply. Outside, the wind whispered against the window. The dim glow of the streetlights barely reached her curtains, casting weak slants of light across her room. Somewhere in the distance, a car passed, its engine humming low and steady. Then, silence again. Her stomach tightened. It wasn't just the conversation bothering her. Something else felt off. It was the stillness in the air. The kind of silence that wasn't peaceful, but heavy. Waiting, watching. Rachel shifted, sitting up slightly. From the hallway, a faint sound reached her ears. A voice, her brows furrowed. At first, she thought it was just the TV left on low. But as she strained to listen, she realized it wasn't the TV at all. It was her mother. Slowly, Rachel swung her legs off the bed and padded toward her door. She hesitated before stepping out into the hallway, the wooden floor cool beneath her feet. The house felt different in the dark, smaller, tighter. Shadows stretched in unfamiliar ways, and each step she took seemed too loud, too sharp. She passed the bathroom, the small storage closet. Then, she reached her mother's door. It was slightly open. Rachel stilled. Through the crack, the faint glow of a lamp flickered against the walls, casting soft, trembling shadows across the room. She peeked inside. Her mother sat at the dining table, shoulders slightly hunched, her head lowered. The dim light illuminated her features. Tired eyes, deep lines of exhaustion carved into her skin. But it wasn't just the exhaustion that caught Rachel's attention. It was the tears rolling down her mother's face. Rachel froze. Her mother wasn't the type to cry, at least not where anyone could see. And yet there she was, shoulders trembling as she clutched something in her hands. A photograph. Rachel couldn't see who it was of. But then, her mother's voice broke the silence. It was barely above a whisper, a soft, aching plea. "I wish I could give her the world, but all I have is my heart." Rachel's chest tightened. A strange, unsettling feeling washed over her. It was the way her mother said it, as if she were admitting something, as if she were grieving something that hadn't happened yet. A confession to a ghost. Rachel frowned, shifting slightly. The floor creaked beneath her foot. Her mother stiffened. For a second, Rachel thought about stepping inside, about asking what was wrong. But then, something in her rebelled. Maybe it was frustration. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe she just didn't want to deal with this tonight. So instead, she rolled her eyes, shaking her head. Ugh, Mom is always so dramatic. She turned, walking back toward her room. She didn't see the way her mother exhaled shakily, pressing a hand to her chest. Didn't notice the way she clutched the side of the table, as if steadying herself. Didn't hear the way her breathing faltered, just for a moment. Rachel climbed back into bed, pulling the blankets over herself. She shut her eyes, forcing herself to push the image away. Her mother was fine. She always worried too much. Tomorrow would be just another day. But outside her room, the clock continued ticking, louder and louder, as if time was running out. The classroom buzzed with excitement. Rachel sat at the far end of the lunch table, her tray untouched, fingers mindlessly tapping against its surface. The voices around her were bright, full of joy and expectation. "I can't believe my parents got me this gold necklace for my birthday," one girl gushed, lifting the delicate chain from her collarbone. The light caught the pendant just right, making it shimmer. "That's nothing," another girl interjected, laughing. "My dad's sending me to Hawaii next week. 5-star hotel, jet skis, everything." A chorus of gasps and cheers followed. Rachel forced a smile, nodding along. But inside, something twisted. It wasn't just jealousy. It was resentment. Why couldn't she have a birthday like that? Why couldn't her mom, just once, give her something that made her feel like she wasn't always left behind? She swallowed down the bitterness, but it lingered. She knew she shouldn't be upset. She knew her mother had done everything for her. But was it so wrong to want more? To feel special? She picked at the corner of her notebook, trying to ignore the way her chest tightened. Across the table, one of the girls turned to her. "What about you, Rachel? Your birthday is coming up, right?" "What's your mom getting you?" Rachel froze. For a split second, her mind flashed back to that moment in the kitchen, the hesitation in her mother's voice, the sigh. "Things are a bit tight right now, but I'm saving up for it." Heat rose to her cheeks. She couldn't say that. Couldn't tell them that she didn't even know if she'd get anything at all. So instead, she forced another smile. "Oh, she shrugged, keeping her tone light. "Something special." The girls nodded, satisfied. The conversation moved on. Rachel exhaled, her nails digging into her palm beneath the table. She hated lying, but she hated feeling like this even more. The door swung open with force, hitting the wall with a sharp thud. Rachel stepped inside, her fists clenched, jaw tight. The house was the same, small, quiet, unchanged. Just like her mother's life. Just like her life. Her mother stood by the sink washing dishes, her back turned. The sound of water running filled the silence. Rachel didn't bother hiding her anger. "You know what, Mom?" Her voice cut through the air, sharp, filled with something she wouldn't recognize as regret until it was too late. "It's fine, you can't even afford a stupid birthday gift anyway." The words landed like a slap. Her mother's shoulders stiffened. The running water continued. She didn't turn around, didn't say a word. Rachel expected an argument, a sigh, something. But instead, her mother simply turned off the faucet, dried her hands, and walked past her. No anger, no defense, just silence. Rachel frowned, watching her mother disappear down the hall. Why didn't she fight back? Why didn't she say anything? Why did she just look at her with that sad, knowing smile? The kind that felt more like a goodbye than anything else. Something was wrong, but Rachel was too blinded by frustration to see it. The night air was heavy, thick. The kind that clung to the skin, pressing in from all sides. Rachel walked alone, her arms wrapped around herself, her footsteps echoing against the pavement. She didn't know why she had left the house so abruptly. Maybe she had needed the air. Maybe she had needed the space. Maybe she had just needed to be anywhere but home. The sky above her was shifting. Dark clouds rolled in, swallowing the last remnants of twilight. The air smelled like rain, thick with the promise of an oncoming storm. She barely noticed. Her mind was too full. Anger, frustration, guilt. Her mother's face, that expression of quiet sadness, kept flashing in her mind. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head as if to physically rid herself of the thought. Why did she care so much? She had every right to be upset. Hadn't she spent her whole life watching her mother struggle? Watching her work herself to the bone? Hadn't she been patient? Hadn't she been understanding? Was it so wrong to want just one thing for herself? A sharp gust of wind whipped against her, sending a shiver down her spine. That was when she noticed it. Her vision blurred. It was sudden. 1 second everything was clear. The next, the world tilted. Rachel blinked, reaching out blindly for something, anything to steady herself. Her legs trembled beneath her. Her breath hitched. Something was wrong. Her chest tightened. Her pulse thundered in her ears, erratic, uneven. She stumbled forward, gasping. Then, everything stopped. A second of absolute silence. Then, thud! Rachel hit the pavement, hard. The world spun. Darkness swallowed her whole. She woke to the sound of beeping. Slow, steady, unfamiliar. Rachel blinked. The ceiling above her was white. Too white. The air smelled sterile, heavy with the sharp sting of antiseptic. This wasn't her room. Wires pressed against her skin. Tubes. Machines. The slow, rhythmic pulse of a heart monitor. Her chest felt different, like something was inside, constricting, pressing against her ribs. She tried to sit up, but a weak groan was all she managed before a hand caught hers. Her mother. Rachel turned her head. Her mother was sitting beside her, clutching her hand so tightly it hurt. Tears streaked down her face, silent but endless. Rachel's throat felt dry. Her lips parted. But before she could ask, the door opened. A doctor stepped inside. His expression was unreadable, professional but heavy. Rachel's stomach twisted. Then he spoke. "Rachel, you have a serious heart condition." Silence. "If we don't find a donor..." A pause. "You may not have much time left." Rachel's mind fractured. She barely heard the rest. It was like she had been shoved underwater, the world above muffled, distant. Not much time left. Not much time left. Not much time left. Her mother squeezed her hand tighter, but Rachel couldn't look at her. Her pulse pounded in her ears, but she still managed to whisper, "Did he just tell you I'm going to die?" No one answered. The room fell into silence. The hospital walls were cold, sterile. The faint hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a pale glow over the quiet office. Papers were stacked neatly on the desk, but the one on top, the one that mattered most, lay open, waiting. Rachel's mother sat still, hands trembling slightly as she held the pen. Her breath was shallow. Her fingers tightened around the pen, pressing harder against the paper than necessary. This was it. There was no turning back. The doctor sat across from her, watching with quiet understanding. His face carried no judgment, only sympathy. "You don't have to do this," he murmured. She closed her eyes for a brief moment. Yes, she did. Her daughter was dying, and there was only one way to save her. She exhaled slowly and signed her name. The pen scratched against the paper, finalizing a decision that would never be undone. A decision that would take one life and give another. When she lifted her hand, she stared at the ink, her own signature looking foreign. A heartbeat passed, then another. The doctor reached forward, taking the paper gently. "We'll begin preparation soon." She nodded, her lips pressing together. It was done. Rachel never noticed the change at first. The way her mother moved a little slower. The way she stared at her a little longer. The way she held her hand at every chance she got. At first, she assumed it was just worry. But then, there was something else. Her mother was happy. She smiled more, laughed more. She made Rachel's favorite meals without being asked. She sat with her at night, brushing her hair like she used to when she was a child. Rachel should have found it strange. She should have asked. But in those fleeting moments, she didn't care. For the first time in weeks, things felt normal. And she needed normal. So when her mother smiled at her across the dinner table and said, "Don't worry, sweetheart. Everything will be okay," Rachel believed her. But behind closed doors, her mother was writing a letter that would change everything. Her hand shook as she scribbled the words, but she never stopped. The ink bled onto the page, each sentence filled with the love she could never say out loud. A mother's final message, a goodbye wrapped in ink and paper. And when the letter was done, she folded it carefully, tucking it away where it would be found when the time was right. Not today, not tomorrow, but when Rachel needed it most. Rachel's eyes fluttered open to the soft, sterile glow of hospital lights. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of antiseptic. A slow, rhythmic beeping filled the silence, steady and unchanging. Her body felt different, lighter, yet weighted by something she couldn't quite name. She tried to move, but a dull ache radiated through her chest. Something was wrong. Her hands brushed against the sheets, against the tubes, against the wires tethering her to the machines, keeping her alive. Rachel's mind was foggy, her memories jumbled. The last thing she remembered was, what? Walking home? The darkness creeping in. Then, nothing. She blinked, trying to focus, and then she saw her. A nurse stood at the foot of the bed, holding something in her hands. A letter. Rachel's pulse quickened. The nurse hesitated, her face unreadable, before stepping forward. "This is for you," she murmured. Her voice was soft, too soft. Rachel's fingers trembled as she reached for the envelope. The paper felt fragile, delicate in her grasp. The handwriting on the front was familiar, painfully familiar. Her mother's handwriting. Rachel's breath hitched, her throat tightened. Slowly, she unfolded the letter. Her eyes scanned the words, and with each line, something inside her cracked. "My beautiful Rachel, if you are reading this, it means you made it through, and the surgery was a success." Rachel's hands clenched around the paper. "No, no, no, no. Remember when you asked me what I'd get you for your 20th birthday? I didn't know what to say then, but now I do. I gave you my heart." The world stopped. Rachel gasped, the letter slipping from her fingers, fluttering to the floor. Her body shook, her breath coming in ragged, broken sobs. "No!" Her voice cracked, raw with disbelief. "No, no, no!" She clutched her chest. The heartbeat she felt beneath her palm wasn't hers. It was hers. Her mother's. Rachel's vision blurred. Her breathing hitched. The nurse stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your mother was a perfect match." Rachel's entire body went cold. She gave you her heart." A scream tore from her throat, a sound that didn't just carry grief. It carried loss. It carried regret. It carried the unbearable truth that she would never hear her mother's voice again. She would never get to say sorry. She would never get to say goodbye. The cemetery was silent, save for the whisper of the wind weaving through the trees. The sky hung low, heavy with a muted gray that seemed to reflect the weight pressing against Rachel's chest. She stood before the headstone, motionless, her eyes tracing the letters carved into the stone. Her mother's name, her mother's final resting place. A place she never should have had to visit so soon. Rachel's breath trembled as she lifted a hand to her chest, pressing her palm against the heartbeat that wasn't hers. It was hers. The rhythm beneath her ribs belonged to the woman who had loved her beyond comprehension. The woman who had sacrificed everything. Rachel's fingers curled into the fabric of her sweater as silent tears slipped down her cheeks. For so long, she had wanted a birthday gift. Something special, something that would make her feel seen. And now, she had received the most precious gift of all, a gift she could never repay. Her lips parted, a shaky breath escaping. "She gave me life before I was born." Her fingers pressed harder against her chest, feeling the steady, unwavering pulse. "And she gave me life again." A gust of wind swept past, carrying with it the faint scent of her mother's perfume. Rachel closed her eyes. Nothing is bigger than a mother's love. The wind howled softly, almost as if answering her. She stayed there, unmoving, until the sky began to dim, until the weight of everything she had lost settled into something else, something that wasn't just grief, but gratitude. Her mother was gone, but she would live on, in every heartbeat, in every breath, forever.
This story is more than just a tragedy. It is a testament to the boundless love of a mother. A love that sacrifices, that gives without hesitation, that endures beyond life itself. Too often we take our loved ones for granted. We assume they will always be there, pushing aside the small moments, forgetting that time is never promised. Rachel spent so long wanting something she thought would make her happy. But in the end, she realized the greatest gift was something she never even asked for. Let this be a lesson to all of us. Appreciate those who love you while you still have them. Don't wait until it's too late to say thank you, to say I love you, to say I see everything you do for me and I am grateful. What did this story teach you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this touched your heart, hit that like button. Let's make sure more people hear this story. And if you love stories that move you, that make you think, that stay with you long after the video ends, subscribe to Rare Tales Unfold. It's totally free and you won't regret it. Thank you for watching. Until next time, cherish those you love.